Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Blinken sees a path to Gaza peace, reconstruction and regional security after his Mideast tour. Blinken's optimism for post-war Gaza runs into Mideast skepticism. Iran's navy seizes oil tanker in Gulf of Oman, in new threat to Mideast shipping. Don't bomb the Houthis. Blinken meets with El-Sisi in Egypt to discuss plight of Palestinians in Gaza. Blinken sees a path to Gaza peace, reconstruction and regional security after his Mideast tour. The Independent. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has received support from Arab and Muslim nations for planning reconstruction and governance in Gaza after the conflict with Israel ends. Blinken secured buy-in from leaders in Turkey, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain during his recent visit to the Middle East. These countries, along with Greece, pledged to participate in general planning, although specific contributions are yet to be determined. However, Arab support is conditional on the establishment of a pathway for the creation of an independent Palestinian state, something Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu opposes. Blinken's optimism for post-war Gaza runs into Mideast skepticism. Washington Post. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken received little public enthusiasm from Arab leaders during his recent visit to the Middle East, despite touting progress on post-war planning for the Gaza Strip. Arab leaders insisted that any post-war plan must include an independent state uniting the West Bank and Gaza under a Palestinian-led government. Blinken's discussions with Israeli officials during his visit revealed divisions over Gaza. The U.S. has expedited the transfer of billions of dollars in powerful bombs, guns and munitions to Israel, but the two sides remain opposed on issues such as the return of Palestinians to northern Gaza and when the Palestinian Authority can receive its tax revenue collected by Israel. The possibility of a different Israeli government in the future is little relief for Palestinians in southern Gaza, especially after Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Blinken that Israel would intensify its offensive there. The timeline of operations has been a source of contention between U.S. and Israeli officials. Iran's navy seizes oil tanker in Gulf of Oman, in new threat to Mideast shipping. South China Morning Post. Iran's navy has seized an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman that was at the center of a major crisis between Tehran and Washington. The vessel was once known as the Suez Rajan and was involved in a year-long dispute that saw the U.S. Justice Department seize 1 million barrels of Iranian crude oil on it. The seizure comes after weeks of attacks by Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on shipping in the Red Sea. Don't bomb the Houthis. Foreign Affairs. The conflict between the United States and the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea is escalating, with the rebels launching multiple attacks on commercial vessels. The attacks have forced some shipping companies to reroute around the Horn of Africa, adding time and costs to their journeys. The U.S. has mobilized international partners to protect commercial vessels and is considering military attacks on Houthi targets. However, the author argues that a diplomatic approach is preferable to military retaliation. Previous military efforts against the Houthis have only strengthened their military capabilities and boosted their legitimacy at home. The author suggests that the U.S. should push for a sustainable peace in Yemen while continuing efforts to deter Houthi attacks. The Houthi movement began in the 1990s as a response to Saudi proselytizing of Wahhabism and grew to oppose corruption in the Yemeni government. They gained support beyond the Zaidi community and took control of Yemen's capital, Sana'a, in 2014. They have since received support from Iran and have used their attacks in the Red Sea and on Israel to demonstrate their importance to Iran's axis of resistance. The U.S. and other international actors must respond to the Houthi attacks to preserve the Red Sea shipping route and prevent further regional escalation. However, airstrikes and designating the Houthis as a terrorist organization are unlikely to be effective strategies. Instead, the U.S. should focus on diplomacy and pushing for an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as the Houthis have linked their aggression to Israel's operations in Gaza. Finding a sustainable solution to both conflicts is critical to de-escalating tensions in the region and ending Houthi attacks on commercial vessels. Blinken meets with El-Sisi in Egypt to discuss plight of Palestinians in Gaza. New York Times. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has discussed the ongoing situation in Gaza with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in Cairo. Blinken also spoke with el-Sisi about how to prevent the situation from escalating further. The U.S. has accused Iran of supporting militias that have been attacking American and Israeli forces, with the most urgent challenge being posed by the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Blinken has warned that there will be consequences for such actions. Arab leaders attending a summit in Jordan have issued a statement rejecting any Israeli attempts to reoccupy parts of Gaza and insisting that displaced Palestinians be able to return home. Inside Biden's push to head off an Israel-Hezbollah war. Foreign policy. Amos Hochstein, a deputy assistant to the president, has been sent by the Biden administration to try to ease tensions between Israel and the Lebanon-based militant group, Hezbollah. Hochstein has already held meetings with senior Israeli officials and is set to travel to Beirut to continue discussions. The goal is to prevent an Israel-Hezbollah war from breaking out, which could be much deadlier than the ongoing conflict with Hamas. Hezbollah is backed by Iran and is considered one of the most heavily armed non-state actors in the world, with an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 missiles and rockets aimed at Israel. Lebanon's government has signaled its desire to restart talks on implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which ended the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war but was never fully implemented. Experts and officials fear that the prospect of a full Israel-Hezbollah war is increasing with each passing day, as cross-border skirmishes raise the risk of miscalculations or missteps that could spiral into a war. However, it is in the interest of both sides to start diplomatic talks and prevent a major war. Some experts believe that Hochstein has a chance of at least getting the ball rolling, although many doubt that he can achieve a full diplomatic breakthrough. Hezbollah has indicated that it is open to talks, although it believes that they should take place only after the war in Gaza ends. Lebanon likely needs a fig leaf from Israel to kickstart the process, such as Israel signaling a willingness to discuss some of the disputed points along the land border. However, Iran, which backs Hezbollah, has the deciding vote in Hezbollah's next moves. Still no endgame as Blinken concludes latest Middle East tour, analysts. Al Jazeera. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has concluded his fourth tour of the Middle East since the war in Gaza began, but foreign policy analysts have questioned whether the visit was an act of diplomacy or damage control. Blinken visited Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the West Bank, Bahrain, and Egypt. Much of the attention was on the U.S.'s continued support of Israel as it continues its months-long military campaign in Gaza. Critics argue that the U.S. and Israel have different visions for the path forward after the war, with the U.S. calling for a two-state solution and Israel rejecting this. The U.S. stance on Gaza could also harm efforts to calm tensions with Iran and its proxies as part of a wider pivot to Asia. Blinken's visit is fundamentally performative, according to an analyst. South Africa's support for the Palestinian cause has deep roots. Economist. South Africa's foreign policy is facing accusations of hypocrisy due to its support for Palestine and its condemnation of Israel. The African National Congress, ANC, sees parallels between the struggle against apartheid in South Africa and the plight of the Palestinians. Symbols of solidarity with Palestine are visible across South Africa, from motorway billboards to street art. The ANC has also called for South Africa to downgrade its diplomatic presence in Israel and has accused Israel of being an apartheid state. South Africa's support for Palestine has deep roots, with the ANC developing an antipathy towards Israel during the apartheid years when the Jewish state provided weapons and technology to South Africa in violation of a UN arms embargo. The recent war in Gaza has provided an opportunity for the ANC to gain political support, as President Cyril Ramaphosa's approval ratings were at an all-time low before the conflict. However, the government's support for Palestine has also damaged South Africa's international standing, particularly in relation to its muddled response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After 20 years, it's time for America to leave Iraq. Hill. The U.S. killing of a senior Iraqi official has sparked outrage and calls for the removal of U.S. troops from Iraq. Mushtaq Jawad Qasim al-Jawari, a commander in an Iran-linked Iraqi militia, was killed on January 4. The Pentagon labeled the militia a terrorist group, but did not mention that it was also part of the Iraqi government's Popular Mobilization Forces. Iraq's Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, said that the justifications for the U.S. presence in Iraq had ended. Gazan prisoners describe abuse at secretive Israeli detention sites. Washington Post. Israel is detaining hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza, many of whom have disappeared into a legal gray zone, according to a report in the Washington Post. Detainees are being held without charge inside Israel under a secretive legal framework that has never been applied on this scale before, despite it being widely regarded as being open to abuse. A number of detainees have reported beatings and mistreatment, and some detainees have died in Israeli prisons. The International Committee of the Red Cross says it has been barred from visiting Palestinian prisoners held by Israel since October 2014. There have also been a large number of arrests in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where Palestinians are subject to Israeli military law. The Israeli military says that over 700 operatives from terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip have been taken for further questioning in Israel, but says that those who are not involved in terrorist activities are sent back to Gaza, and those who must continue to be held are brought before a judge. However, there are concerns that the process is not transparent, and that detainees are being held for long periods of time without access to lawyers. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six from the six-dimensional world, here to bring you the latest updates from the Middle East. Let's dive into the news. First, we have U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's efforts to secure Arab support for Gaza's reconstruction and governance. Blinken received conditional support from Arab and Muslim nations, with the establishment of an independent Palestinian state being a key condition. However, skepticism remains, as Arab leaders insist on uniting the West Bank and Gaza under a Palestinian-led government. It seems there is still a long way to go before a consensus is reached. Next, we turn to Iran's navy seizing an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman, further threatening shipping in the region. This seizure comes after weeks of attacks by Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on international shipping in the Red Sea. It's clear that tensions are escalating, and a diplomatic approach is needed to prevent further conflict. Speaking of the Houthi rebels, there is a call to not bomb them but to pursue a diplomatic solution in Yemen. Military retaliation has only strengthened the rebels and led to more attacks on commercial vessels. The focus should be on finding a sustainable peace in Yemen and resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as the Houthis have linked their aggression to Israel's operations in Gaza. Let's hope diplomacy prevails. Moving on, Blinken met with Egyptian President El-Sisi to discuss the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. The U.S. has accused Iran of supporting militias that have been attacking American and Israeli forces, adding to the urgency of finding a solution. Arab leaders attending a summit in Jordan have rejected any Israeli attempts to reoccupy parts of Gaza and insist on the return of displaced Palestinians. The situation remains tense, and diplomatic efforts are crucial. In a related development, the Biden administration is working to prevent an Israel-Hezbollah war. Hezbollah is one of the most heavily armed non-state actors in the world, with thousands of missiles aimed at Israel. The goal is to start diplomatic talks and prevent a major war, although the path to a breakthrough is uncertain. It's a delicate situation that requires careful handling. Blinken's recent tour of the Middle East has left some questioning whether it was an act of diplomacy or damage control. The U.S.'s support for Israel in its military campaign in Gaza has raised concerns, as the two sides have different visions for the path forward. The situation could also impact efforts to calm tensions with Iran and its proxies. It remains to be seen how this will play out. South Africa's support for Palestine has deep roots, with the ANC drawing parallels between the struggle against apartheid and the plight of Palestinians. However, this support has also damaged South Africa's international standing, particularly in relation to its response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's a complex issue with political implications. Lastly, there are calls for the U.S. to leave Iraq after the killing of a senior Iraqi official. The justifications for the U.S. presence in Iraq are being questioned, and there is growing outrage and demands for the removal of U.S. troops. It's a situation that needs to be closely monitored. That's all for today's news from the Middle East. It's a region full of complexities and challenges, but also opportunities for peace and cooperation. What are your thoughts on these developments? I welcome your ideas and questions. Let's continue the discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.